Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Canada Hoops. It's your boy Maddie. Thank you for your continued support. Please keep downloading and sharing us. Visit our YouTube channel. Hit us up on Instagram and X.com. Our guest today represents Sudbury, Ontario. He is a former Lockerbie Viking, Colorado State Ram, and of course, he represented Canada basketball for years on the senior men's national team, most notably with the 1988 Olympic team. He is David Turcotte. Dave, thanks so much for joining us on Canada Hoops, man.
Hey, absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I was excited, and I know you're going to have a lot of great stories and just a lot of time in the game with the program. Looking forward to what you have to share. How are things, man? Let our listeners and the Canada basketball community know how you're doing and just kind of where life's at for you.
Life for me is great. I consider myself probably one of the luckiest humans alive. I live with a lot of gratitude every day. My family's healthy. My daughter right now is racing for Canada. Felicia Turcotte is racing with BC snowboard team for Canada on the North America tour. She's an Olympic hopeful for the next Winter Olympics. And she did so I'm thrilled to have more athletes in the family. I've got my 14-year-old Simone is a great swimmer and doing well in school and healthy. My daughter Genevieve wants to be a professional soccer player. And then, of course, my wife Monica is fantastic, and she keeps us all together, and she's the best athlete of all of us. So
nice.
Very, very fortunate in my life right now. I'm CEO of a technology company called Stream PC that does, high performance data security compliance and, streaming business computing as a service down here in the States. And that's going very, very well for us. I have a lot of gratitude. A lot of things have worked out well, and it gives me a lot of time. Honestly, now the best thing about where I'm at right now is in the last 3 to 4 years, I've been able to spend more and more time circling back to the national team and the program, trying to find ways to support the program, working with Michael Bartlett, working with Rowan Barrett, working with Paul Jones, all great human beings, all three, right? And, they're all saying, hey, how can we all get better? And it's just wonderful to reconnect with such great personalities and think about Canada as a nation and Canada as a basketball nation and how we can represent that better and do, obviously, pursue our shared goal of a gold medal at an Olympics one of these days. And so hopefully it's LA for us, right, for men and women. So that's really great time for us and our family, but it's awesome to be reconnecting with Canada. And thanks again for having me. This is another opportunity to just talk Canada, talk basketball, and in my world, what could be better than that,
Yeah, no, I agree, man. And glad to hear things are going well for you and your family. And I love, you're touching on the program and, we'll talk a lot more obviously, but just kind of having everyone come back in and give some input and Canada basketball recognizing the value in that. And, you guys had an opportunity this past summer to gather in Toronto to kind of do obviously a reunion and send the current team off. I wanted to ask you about that. That was super cool. I know a lot of people really appreciated that and valued that because my understanding is kind of through some of the years, some of the guys maybe felt disconnected from the program. Just talk about the reunion, Dave, and what that was like and what that meant for everyone involved.
No, it was fantastic. And I'll tell you why. Props to Rowan Barrett, by the way. And I got to give props to Howard Kelsey. I mean,
nice.
Rowan called me up and I haven't talked to Rowan very much. Like, we know each other. We played with each other. We tried out for the team together in the early 90s when he was coming up and I was, he was coming up and I was kind of slowly on the plateau and down curve out. And so we played together a little bit, but the reality is really, really respect his leadership. And he reached out and said, you know what, Dave, it's we've been thinking about this a lot. As you know, in Rowan's family, they've had some difficult circumstances this last few years. And
Yes.
He came out of the other side of that with a bigger heart and a bigger vision. And, God bless him for that. And he reached out and said, you know what, Dave, we really do need to connect everyone. So it began with Rowan Barrett, and he gets the most credit for the inspiration to bring the guys together. And I don't want to overstate, you cannot overstate that. But then right after that, you got Howard Kelsey. He calls me and he calls Howard Kelsey and saying, hey, can you get on the horn with all these guys? And literally we had a week's notice.
Wow.
Like we had almost no time whatsoever. And it was like me and Howard picking up the phone going, hey, and trying to find guys. The really interesting thing when you think about it is And this is when you talk about our country as a basketball nation, when you think about that alumni, here's what kind of made it a little bit easier than it should have been, right? So if you think about it, there was we had, in 1976 we hosted, we didn't have to qualify, right? So there wasn't really an Olympic qualifying team there. Then you had 1980, which was canceled because of the political stuff, right, with the Russians and all that. So then you have the 84 and the 88 team. So I'm an alternate on the 84 team, right? And so, but on that 84 team, you've got, like I said to earlier, is like you've got that core team of Jay, Eli, Leo, Bill Winnington, Greg Wilcher, Gerald Kazanowski, that core, Danny Mahar, John Hatch, all those great players, right? Then you go to the 88 team, and it's pretty much, except for, it's now I'm off the alternate side, and I'm actually playing pretty regularly as the number one sub for Jay and Eli, and so I'm coming in for either one of those guys. But that other than me coming in and one or two guys dropping out, it's the exact same guys.
Right.
So 84, 88 are largely the same 12 to 14 players. Okay. Well, then you don't have another Olympic team until Steve's year in 2000, Steve Nash's year, right?
Yeah.
And then you have this team in 24. So it was like to think about basketball. And by the way, I keep joking with my American friends here. Hey, it's our game. We invented it, and we're just renting it for you for a little while, right?
Yeah.
For the country that invented the game of basketball and been playing for 100 years, okay, there's 48 or 49 male Olympian basketball players. Right. That's it. And so a lot of those guys for us, and what was fantastic was, so first of all, it's a pretty small group of guys, number one. And by the way, it's the women have been more successful than us over time, right?
For sure. Yeah.
Props for that. But for all of us, what was great about it was, like, I hadn't seen Leo in decades. I hadn't seen John Hatch, came from Europe, flew in for it. We had, Wilcher, Carl Tillman, who I love dearly, I hadn't seen him in 20 years. Danny Mahar, I hadn't seen in a decade. So Dwight Walton, of course, and Dwight, Wayne Yearwood, myself, we were all super tight. We were kind of like the young cat crew coming into the 84, 88 teams. We were the young guys coming in, breaking through. And it was phenomenal to see those guys. And so from an alumni perspective, to just talk to former teammates and that is something that needs to happen a lot more. And I think it is going to be something that we try to do, like every World Championships, every Olympics, or at least every Olympics. And I've got some things I'm trying to do to help with that. But then the other thing was connecting to the young players, and the young players now are different than young players 30 years ago. Every one of the guys on our team final roster is an NBA player, right? And those guys, the sacrifices are different. The risks are different. If you're Shea and you're making an enormous amount of money every year, the risk of playing in the summer and representing your country is the greatest to someone like Shea.
Yeah.
But here's a guy that made more, that committed first, most aggressively. He's all in for Canada. And so you look at that leadership and just, hats off to Shea and who he is as a person and as a human being. But Jamal Murray, same thing. Kelly Olynyk, great leadership. So it was great to talk to all these guys, Dylan Brooks, all these, Lou Dort, all the players that I got a chance to talk to and sit down with. It was great to connect with them and get their perspective. They were really welcoming, incredible young people, great leadership, great humans. So it was nice on both hands. It was great to connect with the old, but it was also great to see how fantastic our program is doing overall. Sure, we saw some things we got to fix. We had a disappointing finish, right? But that's the maturity of learning how you play in Olympics. It's not like rolling the balls out in the NBA where it's different. It's not, and this is there's a lot of people that have that misnomer. Well, I'm just going to put all these all-star togethers and it's just going to magically gel and we're going to have this killer team. Doesn't work like that. You have to prepare for the Olympics very, strategically, very focused, and we learned some great things. So really fantastic reunion. Loved it. Again, the Basketball Canada staff, by the way, supporting rowing. Michael Bartlett flew back on a red eye to get into that thing, exhausted, and he showed up to be there to support that whole event. So hats off to Basketball Canada, hats off to Rowan's staff and Michael Bartlett for pulling it off, and really Howard Kelsey for being a lot of the juice to get the players out there to show up. It was a fantastic event.
Yeah, well said, man. Very cool. I know, Mike Bartlett's a friend of ours, who's joined us a few times, and will usually answer my text pretty quick. And I know he valued the reunion and knew its importance. And just for the current team, like I did hear they were really grateful for that as well, to meet everybody and connect with the past players and understand where the program has come. And you nailed it with Shea, man. Like a great leader for the program, and he recognizes the opportunity and the importance to elevate it and push it further. So loved that insight. Run it back, man. Just tell me about growing up in Sudbury and how the game started to come into a fold. I think you were a good hockey player too, so I want to ask you about playing some hockey. But yeah, just tell me about starting out, man.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually, okay, Sudbury, of course, at the time was probably 5 hours north of Toronto on a one, 2-lane highway, and which was always a risk. It was 50-50 whether you made it to Toronto every time you went, right?
Right.
But no, but I loved it. I did grow up playing hockey. I grew up in a small town in Hammer, like was way out in the sticks, and so my French Canadian Métis roots kind of kept us up. We're all originally from the Ottawa Valley, Hull, Quebec, kind of that area between Quebec and Ontario. Our family migrated around the north, wound up in Sudbury. My parents were both teachers, and that's where the teaching opportunities were. Despite them both graduating from the University of Toronto, they moved north to get those teaching opportunities. And I grew up in the north playing hockey, and I remember being and there's pictures. I'm 3 or 4 years old playing at the outdoor rink at 30 below zero. And that's where we grew up before. And you did that at 5:36 in the morning before the school bus came, And so I actually was thinking about playing professional hockey. And if you were to see me, like when I was in peak physical shape as a basketball player, and I walked in the room, you'd go, that's a hockey player. Because I was 6'3", but like 4% even at 4% body fat, I was still 222, 223. So I was a bigger, heavier guard, which is why, by the way, the national team needed someone like me in the backcourt. When you think of Jay and Eli, and those other guys, they're a little slighter, a little less physical, a little less athletic, right?
You were Lou Dort before Lou Dort came along there, Dave.
Lou Dort, Dylan Brooks and Lou Dort are the two guys that I align with the most. Like that's my body type, except Lou Dort, of course, is bigger than me, right?
Yeah.
But taller than me. But I love Lou's game, by the way. I tell you right now, I have a soft spot for, and I'll get to those two guys later. I have a soft spot for both of those guys. Those guys need to be members of the team for the next, and I can give you some player parallels between those two guys when we get there, like guys in the past that are, with those guys.
Right.
But, growing up in Sudbury, I played hockey every day and I loved it. And I've always been a passionate athlete. I love competing. I love getting out there and getting in people's faces and really, really getting in that moment of being willing to put yourself on the line to absolutely play to win every single play. You know what I mean?
Right.
And there's a lot of people that quote unquote play not to lose, right? And I've always tried to be that guy that, and the truth is though, what's unique about growing up in Sudbury playing is that you kind of grow up having no concept of the larger world and how good anybody else is, right? And so I was very, very fortunate to meet, Mitch Lalonde and his wife were Mary Collinson now, but Mitch Lalonde and Mary did a basketball camp in the 8th grade. Here comes this kid, and I was athletic, and I was in the 8th or 9th grade and could already grab the rim, and I was bigger and stronger than the other kids. But the thing is that I was a terrible, terrible basketball player. Terrible. Like I was like a hockey player, wrestler plays basketball, crashing into people and doing all that, and they're like foul, 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 But what happened is like I always tell my own kids that, like when you're talking about playing a sport, right? It's kind of like falling in love. It's like a lightning bolt that just hits you, and it's like I literally fell in love with the game. Like 8th grade, at Lockerbie Composite High School, they did a camp, Mitch and Mary Lalonde at the time, and just fell in love with it. And the next thing you know, I was in there 2 hours before camp started and trying to play one-on-one and trying to shoot, and I was terrible at all of it, but I loved it and kept playing and kept practicing. And from that moment on, I literally never stopped playing. But now the other good fortune that I had was, and this was a really rare thing. And so I joke about this a lot, but this is true. Okay. True stat. Sudbury, Ontario. And I want to challenge you and all of your listeners and any Canadian To this day, Sudbury, Ontario, Canada remains the highest per capita producer of Olympians in the history of Canadian basketball. Bar none. No one's close. We have 150,000 people. On the 1984 team, we had two, me and Eli. Like I said, I was an alternate, but I was there. 1988, me and Eli, by the way, went to the same high school, right? So that always helps. Yeah. But so you have two, and then you had Carol Hamilton on the women's side, Marianne Kowal on the women's side, same era in the 80s. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Then you go now, we got Sila.
Yeah.
Sila's out there killing it. So we've had a Sudburyan on the Olympic team every single time that Canada has qualified. So think about that. Toronto can't even say that, right? So I don't know. So there's something about Sudbury and growing up in the north, I think, and this is me talking trash to everybody else, it makes you tougher to grow up in the north. You know, you got to deal with more. But no, the truth is, though, is that when I was coming up in the 8th and 9th grade, Eli was already going to UVic. But everyone that played with Eli, Mike Sheridan, Diego Favera, his brother Vito, great players like Tim Yanni, all these guys were provincial team level players. Eli was the tide that rised all boats in Sudbury. Like Eli just set a whole other standard. And by the way, Eli's high school basketball team was probably still the best team, the best complete team that came out of Sudbury. But I grew up in a world coming because of what Eli left behind of a whole mini culture of ball players that all we did was play basketball every day. But then the single most important thing that happened that helped me become a player in my 9th grade. So after I go to that basketball camp in the 8th grade, 9th grade comes, teacher strike. 9 months, no school. And I lived about a mile from Laurentian. So 30 below zero, I would run through the bush from my house, get to the back of the Laurentian University gym. I was able to pop open the door and rip it open. Say that now. Break in an entry, do a little B&E to start my career. Right. And I would literally stay at the Laurentian University gym from 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. And all we did for a whole year, and I had like Dario Zulich is another guy he owns the Sudbury Wolves, a very successful guy now, but great player in high school. Ted Leslie, Carol Hamilton, Danny Hamilton, Michael Hamilton, that whole family on the Sudbury secondary side, Rob Thurkle, all kinds of great players. Vito Pasquale, of course, and then all the guys I was playing with in Sudbury back at the time. We had this great culture of players, and guys were playing every single day for hours and hours and hours a day. So that slingshotted me ahead. So when I came, by the time I got done the 9th grade, I was actually starting to play real basketball. And I always had the athletic side, you know. And so like I just had to get the skills to catch up. And so it was that crucible of just absolute saturated basketball experience for a whole year of 10, 12 hours a day. I literally never left the gym. You know, my parents wouldn't even see me. Right. But they knew where I was, you know, but that was that 9th grade year. And then after that, it all took off from the races from there. But it was a great start. And it really was because of a great community of basketball players that I give a lot of credit to, you know.
That's cool, man. I mean, I think for a lot of people today, they wouldn't understand that maybe in a sense. Just like you talk about the North, I actually grew up, born and raised in the Yukon, so I know the North well, and it was the same thing for us. You know, we were like, I'm an old hooper. We were in the gym all the time, right? So, and I think,
oh, for sure,
yeah, and I think people kind of don't really understand that now, just in terms of the way the skill development's gone now, and you know, the focus on the game. But I wanted to ask you, like, at that time, you're working on your game, and you know, you use that whole year off from school to do that. Was like, you know, obviously people in the community that you play with and you look up to. I would imagine Eli was sort of that idol for a lot of people, and then you eventually become teammates. Was there anyone else you really liked that you were kind of looking at their game like, man, they're nice?
Yeah, I got to tell you, there's a couple of great players. Again, players that nobody's really heard of, like in this era, but these were great players. So I would think there was one guy. There are several guys. So one of the things that really helped me a lot was, like I said, when I would hang around the gym so much that, like, when Laurentian University practiced, they let me stay in the gym. So they would do a drill, and I would mimic the drill on the side of the court, right? Yeah. So I was watching Laurentian practice all the time. And there was a great all-provincial player. He might have been an all-Canadian, but a guy named Mike Sheridan. Okay. Mike Sheridan he would, in today's world, he'd be like your triple-double guy. He'd get 12 points, 11 rebounds, 9 assists. And he just did all of this high IQ basketball stuff. And so he was great at that. Another great, great player. And by the way, another national team member I forgot to mention, which gives Sudbury, again, that's why we're the #1 per capita basketball city in the nation.
Yeah.
Check your stats, by the way. I'm telling you, Matty, check your stats.
We'll look at
Jeff McKibben. Jeff McKibben, who played, remember Jeff McKibben's father played for the national team in the 50s for a long, long time. And then Jeff McKibben played with me in the 80s. Okay. We toured together on the national team. Jeff only played, he had a pretty severe knee injury, so only played 1 or 2 years. But Jeff McKibben was a guy that he would, at the time, when he came to Laurentian, he had transferred in from Alabama, I think it was, and playing in the SEC. And I'll tell you, like that was the first guy I met, like as a 10th grader, where it was like, this is what it's like when you play Division I college U.S. basketball. And I give Jeff McKibben a lot of credit because he was highly skilled. He was very athletic. And you could tell athletically, even with a knee injury, athletically, he was above the guys that's, from a Laurentian perspective. But the one thing that he was one of the guys that told me was like when he saw what I was able to do as an athlete and the other things, he's like, hey, kid, hey, Division I is not beyond your reach. And so he's a guy that influenced me a lot, but also gave me confidence because it's hard when you're in like if you're in the Yukon or Sudbury or Northern Quebec or Alberta or Manitoba playing, it's really hard to see in real time how good's the rest of the world? Because the guy I was competing against was not in Sudbury. The guy I was competing against was Jimmy Chipwood shooting somewhere in Indiana that was going to come play me someday. And by the way, I have a funny story about that too. But but the point is that I would say of the guys, so yeah, #1 guy all time in terms of inspiration and setting a standard, Eli. Nobody else. When I grew up, Eli was it, and he left. And so I kind of filled the void that followed in terms of the next guy that might go all the way kind of thing to the national team. But the guys that were around me that I was playing with, and I would say third and most importantly, Carol Hamilton. Because Carol Hamilton was at the gym just as much as me. She and I were best friends. We trained hard together, and she kicked my ass in one-on-one mini. She's a couple of years older than me, so physically she was closer. But she worked really, really hard. And so if you look at the players that I tried to emulate, those were 3. And then the last one I would say that I played with a ton, the 2 would be shout outs to Ted Leslie and Dario Zulich, who were competitors on other teams. By the way, they played for a rival high school. But those guys showed up, practiced, and I learned a lot from Ted. So Ted Leslie's a guy that nobody knows because he was a 5'10" point guard, but he was quick and had great ball handling skills, and he gave me fits, and we had fights, and he was awesome, and he's my brother, and I love him now. Same with Dario Zulich. We would fight and play all the time. So there's always those, but see, that's what I think a lot of people, that's great about the game of basketball. There's true over a lot of communities, right? Is like if you're going to be a great player, no great player shows up in a vacuum. There's always some mentor, some coach, some teacher, some other player that showed you how to take the next step. And I'll mention one other name. He wound up being my provincial team coach, but when I was in the 9th grade, the guy that taught me how to shoot the ball, like get my form perfect and really get it right, was Peter Domingoni. Okay, Peter played at Laurentian University, and he was there playing when I was a 9th grader, and he saw me shooting with my elbow out here, doing this kind of stuff, And he was like, kid, get over here, you knucklehead. And then he actually showed me this is how you start. And if you see Steph Curry today, 1 foot from the rim, one arm follow through, that I did that every day for 5, 6, 7 years without fail. So I would say that's that group of guys of Eli is an elite player. I'd have to say Jeff McKibben, Mike Sheridan, Ted Leslie, Dario Zulich, and Carol Hamilton, who to this day, pains my heart to know she's not with us. And Eli as well, right? But it's like, and then Pete, from a coaching perspective, I'd say Peter Domingoni really helped me, get my jumper, get my shot to the point where it could be an elite level shooter, which is what you have to be at the international level, right? So that was, those are the big influences coming out of Sudbury for me at that time.
Nice. So you're thinking like Division One's a goal and obviously attainable. Like, just take me through that. Like, how did you wind up at Colorado State? You know, where you're looking at other
Okay, so
schools and other offers.
that's a story.
Yeah.
That's actually a story. Okay, so I regard myself as one of those players that nobody knows anything about me, and that's totally okay, right?
Right.
But at the time, there's been 3 players in the history of Canada that made the national team while still in high school, right?
Right.
Me, Leo, Steve Nash. Okay.
Right.
So, but the reason I made it, a couple of things, I got lucky. Carl, 84 team, Carl plays in 84, a Calgary guy, right? Calgary Dinosaurs, Carl Tillman.
Yeah.
We'll talk to him about him later when we get to my top 5 of all time. He goes on he leaves the team, and they had Martin Riley on the team. Well, I think Martin Riley's from Manitoba or BC. I'm not sure where Martin Riley was from, but I came on the team and went head to head with Martin Riley for that last spot, right? As a high schooler. Okay.
Okay.
And so here I am now. So like there's a tournament in Taiwan. So on the junior national team in 1983, there's a tournament in Taiwan called the R.W. Jones Cup that everybody used as kind of a warm-up tournament, play against other countries, let guys get to know each other. It wasn't a FIBA event from the concept of qualifying for a student games or a world champ, but it was a great tournament with great teams, and you'd always get pros from Europe, and you'd always get USA team would be there, Canada would be there. So we played there in the 83. In 1984, in the LA Olympics, so basically, if anyone on the team like Jay, Eli, Carl, Howard, if anyone had an ankle injury, like I was basically on speed, they're saying, hey, if anybody gets hurt, you're coming. So so you had the last cuts from the 84 Canadian team. So this is me in my junior year high school, I think, from 1984. The last our Canadian team is there, but so was the last 12 cuts from Bobby Knight's USA basketball team. So you've got Karl Malone, Danny Manning, Johnny Dawkins. You literally had 2 of the top 50 players of all time, and so you literally have Bobby Knight's. Charles Barkley was on that team, right? So you had an incredible list of players. And the coach of that team was a guy named Lute Olson, who was, of course, national championships and whatever. And so this is one of those things where you talk about lucky, not lucky, life just being life, right? That I look back on with a lot of humor. So bottom line is, I didn't know it at the time, but so here I am, a junior in high school, and I'm playing against all these guys. They're all sophomores, juniors, seniors in college, about to go to the NBA. And Canada's playing really well. I'm actually the leading scorer in the whole tournament in the R.W. Jones Cup. I'm averaging 25 or 22 or something a game. Wow. And so we play against Team USA. And against Team USA, I kind of went off. I had like 22 points, 11 rebounds, and I was going hardcore with like Johnny Dawkins and Barkley a couple times, and I had one of the best games of my life, honestly. Like I didn't even know who they were, and that was one of those things. Had I known who they were, I probably would have crapped my pants. But I had probably the best game of my young life playing against Team USA in 1984, and I you know, and the funny thing is I would see Karl Malone later, and you know, it was because he was here in Utah with me, and it was an awesome experience, and it really was. So we're sitting there after the Team USA game. Canada and USA is going down the tunnel. Lute Olson comes over and grabs me, puts his arm around me, and says, "Kid, where are you going to school? Where are you in college? Where are you going to school next year?" And I said, I got to go back to high school, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but here's the funny thing: he grabs me in the hallway, takes me down the hallway, and he gets on the phone with his staff at Arizona and says, "I've got our guy. We got him. This kid's coming to Arizona." He said, "You want to go to Arizona?" And I said, "Sure." Like, you know, okay. Yeah. Like I'm thinking he's kind of messing with me actually, but he's on the phone, literally on the phone. And I'm standing right there, and he goes, and I start hearing him saying, "What do you mean we already signed him?" "Well, tell him we don't want to sign him." "What do we tell him he's got a red shirt?" So what had happened is they signed a player while he was in Taiwan with Team USA to be a guard at Arizona. They were looking for one more guard.
Okay.
And so he basically was telling them, "Well, tell him he's got to get another, or tell him he's got a risk." So he's telling his coaches to let the guy go. They couldn't do it. He said, "Well, I'll see what I can do, but we want you. We're going to do our thing." Well, the guy that they wanted to redshirt, that they wanted me instead of, was this terrible player named Steve Kerr that went to Arizona.
Oh my
So,
goodness,
so
yeah,
it was really funny. And so Steve, of course, stayed, played a great career. He's a Hall of Famer at every level. I mean, I have so
right,
much respect and love and admiration for. He doesn't know me, by the way. I've never met him.
right,
I might have played against him, maybe, but I've never met him. But when you think about that, that was the fun. Like if you compared me and Steve Kerr, I would be the athletic version of Steve Kerr.
right,
That was the defender. Okay. But that was my story. So what happened was Lute Olson's assistant coach at Arizona was a guy named Tony McAndrews.
okay,
And then he basically said, hey, if you think about coming to Colorado State, he goes, look, you'll start every game. You'll only come out when you want. And, you can do whatever you want. And so the thing was for all Canadians back then, by the way, and this is one thing that, like right now, think about someone like Rowan Barrett's son, RJ. There
yeah,
was no Canada, USA, Canada. There was no going to Mount Verde. Like I couldn't even get to St. Mike's in Toronto to go play basketball because the Basketball Ontario people objected and everyone freaked out like, oh, he's school shopping. He can't come to Toronto. It's not fair to the other high. Like I was protested for trying to get out of Sudbury to play my senior year, my last year of high school in a Toronto high school to get scouted.
yeah,
So there was none of that, right? So the number one threat that Canadians had was you'd go down to the States and I don't care what, you could score 100 points a game in Canada. And when you landed in the USA, the first thing is, who'd you play against? You're nobody. You suck. You don't have any competition. We're going to kick your ass. And so the number one thing was Canadians would go down there, and if assistant coach show up and they've been recruiting Joe Schmo, All-American or All-State player from New York or California, and they're as an assistant coach, their career depends on their recruits doing well.
right,
Canadian players aren't getting a sniff of playing time. So we had a lot of national team level players riding the bench, on Division I teams because they weren't getting a shot to really play. And so he put that in writing for me. I said, you put that in writing and I'll go to Colorado State. And that's what happened. So he said he would, and it was true. I showed up. I started every game for 4 years and had a great career at college, loved every minute of it. It was a great school. But that's that funny thing. I came within a hair's breadth of being the other guard at Arizona that would have played at a way higher profile school, like a super team, right? I would have won, but I would have been on that national championship team. And who knows, maybe the career goes differently. Maybe it doesn't, right? But it's one of those things where I can't complain about my career anyway. I love what happened to it. But the reality is that was how I got there. It was a crazy, story of tips and turns, but it was random. But there was a lot of luck, a lot of opportunity, a lot of timing. And Coach Lute Olson first, and then Tony McAndrews second took a big leap of faith on me. And that was it.
that's like for your era and that generation of players, like that's a common thread that I've heard, and many of us know where it was national team minutes and exposure that led to scholarship opportunities and then even pro opportunities too, right? And things are very different for the players now, and that was whether it was a guy playing on the national team that maybe went to Simon Fraser or a really good school in Canada or something in the States. It was always Canada basketball time that led to that opportunity. And I think that's why your era and that generation was so committed to the program too, because it led to pro deals overseas as well. So the landscape is very different in a lot of ways now because of the AAU scene and whatnot. How did the pro journey start then when you leave Colorado State, man? Take me through that.
So here's what's funny. This is the other part that's kind of funny, right? So, and this is why the '88 Olympics for me were fantastic, because again, nobody knows the real story of this because we're literally playing the games off the media cycle. So all of the games for qualifying for us were in Uruguay. I used to joke with Dwight Walton all the time, Montevideo, Montevideo,
Yeah.
Uruguay, where we're playing. So we're literally playing on the other side of the planet. And of course, we're playing at 2:00 in the morning, we're on the others where the sun is. And so nobody knew what was going on. But the tough thing from a pro perspective about 1988 was, so one of my guys that I competed with a lot was Tim Hardaway Jr., right? Great player for the Heat. And he was a lot like me. We were playing in the WAC conference. He and I actually had similar scoring averages, and we went head to head, and we kind of battled. It was great. Another guy that year was Dana Barros, who was a lottery pick for the Celtics.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of great head-to-head battles. But because we went to, he went to UTEP, I went to Colorado State. Because of the hurricane season, the 1988 Olympics were in Seoul, Korea in October. So it went through the middle of October. Well, by that time, I've already missed all the free agent camps. I've missed the summer league. I've missed everything from my last year of college. So I didn't get a chance to go to free agency. I didn't get a chance to do anything that year. So that year, I wound up playing overseas for like a small pittance of money for 4 months, kind of just disappeared for a minute. And so I didn't get any chance right out of college, because by the time the Olympics was over, now you're saying, well, what NBA team was going to give a kid a shot? They've already got their teams, their rosters have been set for a month. Right. Because I think now it's June, July. By the time August, September's preseason, October, you're rolling out your team, right? Yeah. November, the season starts, right? And so what happened was, this is what's bizarre about my NBA career, which was about 38.4 seconds. But I do have some fun stories there too. But so this is actually a true story. So nobody ever knew that, and this is just the way players were typecast back then, right? Like, if you were to describe me back then and you didn't know me, oh, he's a great shooter and he's a cagey, heady, smart, tough player. And no, I was going to jump over you and dunk on your head. Like I was an athletic player. And so, but nobody knew that. Everyone just assumed I was just like, when I was playing at CSU, I played a very structured offense. I wasn't allowed to get go. That's the one thing when you don't have a lot of choices. I didn't have an opportunity to say, this is the kind of, so here I am going like a scoring point guard that's getting 22, 25 a game and 8 assists a game and 8 or 9 rebounds a game, to a guy that's playing a structured, you just got to catch and shoot, don't drive, don't dribble. So I played in an offense that didn't serve me very well. Like, and whenever I did go have those big games, it's where I had to get in arguments with my coach and say, screw you, I'm just taking over. And we would almost get in fist fights. It was that kind of terrible thing in college, right? So at a lower level, when I missed out on all of that opportunity to go to, at the time, Chicago, Portsmouth, and all the prep camps. So I kind of sat in limbo. Like I said, I played in some stuff. I played in some money tournaments, and I played very briefly overseas in Italy, I think it was, for a guy that got an injury and they needed someone for like 4 weeks, kind of a thing. Yeah. But I never really played that year. The following year in 1980, the summer before camps in 89, I'm doing a basketball camp at CSU, and they had a dunk contest. And I did a dunk where I started up in the stands and did one dribble and threw it and bounced it and jumped and took off outside the lane, caught it and dunked it 2 hands over the top. And a guy named Ben Caton, I owe him my chance to play in the league. Like, he had no idea I could jump at all. He had no idea I was an athlete. And I was like, so, back then I was a 4.3 40 and had basically a 39-inch flat foot vertical. And with off one leg, I could go to 42, 43 and put my head on the rim, and nobody ever knew that. Nobody ever knew that. Right. And so he was like, I didn't know you. And this was a guy that lived in my city. Like, he lived in Denver and I played at CSU. He goes, I didn't know you could jump like that. And I said, well, yeah, I begged for a lob play every now and again, never got one,
Right.
And so because of him, and I got to give him all the credit here, and I'm only sharing the story because he literally saw me win the dunk contest, okay, grabbed me and said, Indiana Pacers camp starts in 2 weeks. Can you go? I said, what do you mean, can I go? Of course I'll go, but I didn't have an agent. I didn't have anything. And so I showed up. And again, luck would have it, the only reason I had a real opportunity the following years when they drafted Reggie Miller. But in that year, there was a guy named Everton Bailey that was on the roster with the Pacers. He developed a heart murmur. And so for a few months, they needed to fill a spot. And so there was so technically, I signed my contract for about 11 and a half seconds. But then if you remember back then, 88, 89, 90 Pacers were the worst team in the NBA. They were coached by Dick Versace at the time. And instead of bringing, I wound up getting cut from the Pacers very quickly, by the way. So I don't ever say I had a real NBA career. But I was there, was in camp, and I signed my contract. But the truth is, I think in November, December of that year, before, they decided that was the year they brought Randy Whitman back to sort of retire him as a Pacer in Indiana. And Randy Whitman was the great player, played in the NBA for like 12 years, played at Indiana University with Bob Knight. he came back and retired as an Indiana Pacer. But my big claim to fame there is that the two guys they cut before me in the guard position, the first guy they cut before me was John Starks.
Wow.
And then the second guy they cut, because John Starks was we were probably the same athletically, but he couldn't shoot his way out of a phone booth, right?
Right.
And the other guy was Quinn Snyder, who's coaching, I think, Orlando, I think now.
No,
so
he's
that
coaching.
We had fun relationships there, but that was a fun story. But yeah, I never say that I really played. Like on paper, I played, but I didn't play a whole season. You know, I didn't even make the roster. They didn't even expect me to show up. And if this guy didn't have a heart murmur, I wouldn't even been on the roster. I wouldn't even been in camp at all. Right. So I was in camp, and we were all in camp. Me, John Starks, and Snyder were in camp because this one guy, Everton Bailey, had a heart murmur. So that was some good luck and good fortune that was someone else's bad luck that gave me an opportunity. But even then, I never made the team and stuck for the season.
Wow, great stuff. Cool story, man. That's like, behind the scenes, nobody would really ever know, right? So,
well, it's crazy. But here's what I will tell you. And you got to realize my entire career, by the way, and this is the difference about playing in that era.
Right.
I went to these things by myself. Here I am, this big wide-eyed newbie from Sudbury going, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. I don't know what normal is.
Right.
So I was competing with this other guy from Texas Tech for the Pacers. And here's me by myself sitting on the bench. Nobody in the organization even knew me, right? And I look over to the guy I'm competing with, and he's got his college coach, his assistant coach, he's got his agent, he's got his mom and dad, he's got this whole crew of people around him, helping him, feeding him, getting him geared, constantly playing the political, come on, coach, and lobbying obviously for their kid.
Right.
And the difference between the pros, and that's was my first inclination, that when you're an NBA player or an NFL player, or you're doing stuff like that, you're a mini cottage industry all by yourself. And in the States, mom and dad and grandma and everybody's in on the game, because if our little kid makes it to the NBA, we're all set for life. So they all have a vested interest in the economic outcomes. And I'm just thinking, I'm just here to play, and the best guy's going to make the team. It's a meritocracy, and it's all about fair and what's good, and it's not. And of course, it never is, right? And so the reality is that I realized then, like, it's a different world. And truthfully, if I had been so great that they had no choice but to put me on the team, it wouldn't have been an issue. But I wasn't that guy. Like Steve Nash is that guy. Shea is that guy. Jamal Murray's that guy, where you're so good, it doesn't matter. But I was that borderline player that, like Eli, Jay, me, Carl, anyone basically not 7 feet tall that was playing on the national team, we were all kind of knocking at the NBA door. And at that point, they weren't really open to let us in. And there wasn't really a pathway for those guys to get in there, right? Unless you were a lottery pick like Leo was, like Steve was, or you were Mike Smrek, Greg Wiltshire, or Bill Winnington, Lars Hansen, all of our big 7-footers that all played in the league, Scott McCullough. If you were 7 feet, you could play. Yeah. But if you weren't, it was a long road.
Yeah, no, good perspective. I mean, now it's, because looking like now everyone's going to scramble and say, well, who's the next Shea coming out of Canada? Who's the next Jamal Murray? Like now it's, the market is so much bigger in that sense. They're looking for, they know there's another kid coming that they want to get. So it's a different, take now for sure, right?
For sure. Well, now it's weird because of NIL, right? And I'm actually helping some folks with some NIL stuff right now, and trying to help. And a hybrid of that is working with, first of all, what's great I love about Shea, he's already dominating the league, and he's so damn young.
Yeah.
Like he what is he now? 26?
I think so. Yeah, right around there.
So like, think about it. That guy's going to dominate the NBA for the next decade.
Yeah.
Because Shea is a lot. First of all, what I love about Shea's game is, like, compare him on the opposite spectrum. Another great Hall of Fame player, Michael Westbrook, or a great player like Kawhi Leonard. Yeah. There are a lot of guys that rely on pure athleticism, that, I mean, like in their bodies. Shea's body, like when the All-Star game here was in Salt Lake, I got media credentials, and I interviewed and spent time with every single Canadian that was in that at the NBA All-Star. And I talked to every one of them. And when I talked with Shea, I was like, if I was guarding Shea, the nightmare is my analogy with him is like he's like a knuckleballer in pitching. Like Shea is not going to come in there and just, triple crossover, dunk over you and do a, that punishing style.
Yeah.
Shea's got the kind of style of play. Like Shea will be great. He's like Luka Doncic, by the way. Luka Doncic and Shea are the same this way.
Yeah.
They both have the best off speed, change of direction. Like Shea is reminiscent to me. I'm gonna check out your old school skills here, but Shea is reminiscent to me of old school Pearl Washington from Syracuse back in the day with his crossover. Pearl was a terrible, fat, overweight athlete that that guy had you on skates all the time because he could hit the brakes hard, pull back, and change speed. You were always off balance. That's what all three of those guys do that. So I look at Shea as being, I'm going to be on the Shea train for a long time because that dude's game lends itself to a long career in the league. I bet you we'll see Shea be great for 10 more years. Okay.
Yeah.
And so there's other guys that are coming up, but that's the thing is that it really is. That's where I think Canada needs to think of itself more as a pipeline, not only to the league, but see, there's certain players that'll play in the league, but we have another big gap where there's certain players that play overseas. I'll tell you right now, the best stretch 4, 7-footer shooting forward in the world right now is Kyle Wiltshire.
I knew where you were going before you even said it. I love Kyle's game. I think he's incredible, man.
Well, I think he was the player. He was a player we were missing on this last national team, right?
Agreed.
Because we had a lot of the same kind of player, right? And that's where people fall in love with the name, right? Like, how do you put look at Jamal Murray and Shea working together? They're both guys that play their game. They're ball dominant guys. By the way, they're both two of the greatest players in the history of our country. They're both phenomenal, but it's hard for them to coexist and get a flow without any time.
And Jamal wasn't healthy either.
So. And Jamal wasn't healthy. But see, Kyle Wiltshire, I'll tell you right now, you put that guy trailing any fast break in the world, or you put him on the wing, you're taking a 7-footer, 30 feet from the basket. And that was the one thing I think where we could have done better was we needed better. Like who are the guys on Team Canada when the ball goes to the corner and they catch the ball and they catch and shoot, you go, oh, it's over. It's in. We didn't have that killer shooter. So there's got to be a way to make sure that we have both types of players playing, right? So you've got the NBA guy, because I look at the NBA as like when you compare NBA to the Olympic game, the NBA is like the WWE compared to Olympic wrestling, okay? Right. Like the NBA makes rules to favor a very particular kind of player, one-on-one, fast break, dunking on a guy, like fancy fan favorite plays.
Yeah, it's rules to promote the product, right?
Exactly. It's a product being promoted. Now, you still got to be a great player. But the difference is, as you saw, the gap between Team USA, if Steph Curry doesn't have the most astronomical, batshit crazy final 2 games.
Yeah, I know.
To beat France and to beat Joker's team.
Yeah, Serbia.
It's over. Like they should have lost the prior game. They were losing the whole game until Steph went off, right?
Yeah.
And so that would, to me, that, by the way, performance by Steph was the greatest Olympic performance I've ever heard of. But that's where I think Canada needs to go in terms of players and how we look at it and how the future is to realize we can't just say, let's throw out all this talent and see what happens. The USA can do that. They're picking amongst 100 players in the NBA that are all elite. We're picking amongst 20 players that are all elite, right? And then we have to look at them very carefully strategically. And that's always the challenge, by the way, because you're going to have some guys like, hey, wait a minute, this guy's he's getting 24 points a game at this college or this pro team. But maybe he's not a good fit, right? So maybe he's not a guy that can flow to make the other 10 guys better. That's always tough, right? So who knows? But yeah, it's a great time for the young players, but it's also, it's bigger time, but bigger problems, bigger things to solve, having a plethora of a cornucopia of riches in terms of talent doesn't always make it easier. Sometimes it makes it harder. And that's why I have a lot of respect for what Rowan's trying to do and what Michael's trying to do, and balancing egos and national interests. And everyone has a regional favorite for the guy that has to be there. I look at it like You got to have 3 guys on that team that are absolute knockdown, almost 50% 3-point shooters. You got to have those absolute killers, even if they can't do the other things, right? And the other countries did that, and that's who beat us, by the way. Yeah. And we lost to France. So that's a whole other story.
No, it's like I was in Vegas. I've been credentialed a few times now, different events, and you know, shout out Mike and his staff. But yeah, I was in Vegas for the showcase game, and just being around the team. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, what an incredible group here that is gonna go to Paris. Like the amount of talent, like never seen before. But then I just was looking at the team, and I was like, man, there's just who's gonna nail a big shot that doesn't have to be your superstar like Shea or Jamal. Just, you know, there was just something a little missing. I did like some of the mix of a Trey Lyles. He can knock it down, but you know, a guy like Kyle Wiltshire, yeah, like, it'll be interesting moving forward where how they kind of, like you said, lessons learned from Paris, no question. So I think everyone, I mean, you know Roe better than I do, but I trust Roe and his process and, you know, his staff and what they're going to try to do. Because we saw pieces of it in the World Cup where we had like almost role guys make plays, and it was a little bit of a different roster, right?
Sure.
So interesting to see how they move forward.
Well, it's interesting. I had a conversation. I was in Vegas too, by the way, and I was sitting down there. In fact, if you would have seen the guy, I was courtside, all in Canada, head to foot, head to toe. I was sitting just next to President Obama. So there's a little name dropper for you right there.
I missed you at the game for sure.
Yeah. I mean, come on. I had, like, you know, Patrick Ewing behind me. I had, you know, Popovich behind me. I was sitting next to Lenny Wilkins, and I got phenomenal seats early thanks to. I got in there and bought them like within 1 minute of them opening the thing to buy them. By the way, I had to buy mine, but you know, it was awesome. A great game, game. But here's I had a conversation with Lou Dort in Vegas, and it turned out to be a prediction that was true. But if you look at the World Championships, the reason we got a bronze medal was because of Dylan Brooks. He had that 39-point game where he went off and hit threes. That was an epic World Championship game, and that's probably still, you know, everyone. I know, and Shea had an off day, but and I said to Lou, I said, Lou, here's the thing, and this is what I'm telling you. You're going to win the games you're supposed to win in the early round. The game that you have to step up and win is the first game out of the round, which was our game against France. And France flat out outcoached us and tricked us because we did the little friendly with them where we beat them by 20.
Yeah.
But they played key players that kept them off the floor. They didn't. They showed them. Everyone wanted to see Wemby. Everybody wanted to see all these big players, but they kept their real strategy. They didn't show that. We showed them our hand and played our guys the way we normally play them. They didn't do that. And then so we play that third game out against France. We win that game, we're in the medal rounds, and you break through. Every team has to have, and by the way, in that third game, it's usually, or your first game out of the preliminary round, it's usually not your superstars. Because when you go to that first game out of the preliminary rounds, the other teams have just been scouting you for the early rounds. They know exactly, okay, they want to use Shea to do this. They're going to do Jamal to do that. So they're going to take those things away. So then it comes to who's the role player, the Lou, the Dylan Brooks, the Jamal Murray, RJ Barrett. Who's that guy that's going to show up and go off and have an epic performance like Dylan did in the World Championships, right? That didn't happen to us. But I said, you watch, it's going to be about shooting. And look at France on the other side. They had this nobody that wasn't a nobody in France. Everyone in France knew that dude could shoot the lights out. And he goes off and starts making threes. And they're like, who the hell is this? He's not even in the scouting report. And he's making up. But it's not like that was the first time that guy ever played ball. They knew what they were doing. And the next thing you know, our entire defense is shaped towards Wemby and the other well-known French players and leaving this guy open to just make shots. And the next thing you know, we're down, 20 in 10 minutes? Like, we're getting obliterated. And they had their role player. So that's what's so hard about the Olympics is that, and that was where my role was, by the way. You know, you had Eli and Jay and me. If Jay got tired, I went in. If Eli got tired, I went in, or whatever. I would go in for either one of them pretty much, right? Yeah. And so, but you have to be sitting there for 8 minutes doing absolutely nothing. And then it's like, okay, you got to guard their best player and you got to go score 6 points in the next 3 minutes. or else we're out of this game. Like
Yeah.
you have to immediately hit the ground ready to go, right? And that's a tough thing. And the French player did it. He's coming out of nowhere, hardly playing, and all of a sudden he's the centerpiece of their offense to beat Canada, right? And he did it. They won, right? And it wasn't because we got dominated by any of their stars. So when I look at our guys, it's like that's where you got to build. You got to build the team with that in mind. Who's the role player that could show up out of nowhere and get you 30 and win a game for you, right? So it's tough. And so, yeah, I'm with you though. I trust Rowan to see that. And I know he knows that. And that we had a tough, painful learning experience, but now it's like, okay, it's not just throw all the most famous names and the best talent that you think out there. Let's really think strategically about our team and how we're going to help the coach make decisions with alternative matchups and playing mismatches and playing against weaknesses, and having some days you might want to have a team that's smaller, but like 4 3-point shooters. That might be the way to win, right? So who knows? And then the opposite might be about size or whichever. So anyway,
no, I do think
that rabbit hole forever together.
Yeah, they're hungry. I know, like they've said post Olympics, like RJ has said, I wish I could go play him again tomorrow, and it's a learning thing. So the next games in LA is going to be growth, and I think
kids. Like RJ, man, I love. By the way, I love RJ's game. Like a guy like RJ could play forever because he does so many things. Left-handed. He's going to have your defense off anyway. But great defender, long. He's so hard to get passes through. He disrupts your offense, rebounds. Like RJ is like one of those guys that's a Swiss Army knife. And so like I have so much love and respect for all of these players and the very, very good things they do, and in their own uniqueness. But RJ's a guy that should be a lifer. He should be on the team for 15 years. He's one of those guys.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, man, we've talked a lot of Canada basketball and your time with the program, but what did playing for Canada mean for you to be able to wear the red and white, have your name on the back, represent you and your family, and represent your country? Just talk about what that meant to you, Dave.
It meant everything. And in fact, it meant if you ask me right now, I mean, I'm very fortunate. Like I never looked, for me, basketball was never a money thing. And by the way, back then it wasn't even conceivable. Like until Steve Nash broke through, and I'll just, before I say that, like one of my pet peeves about the story, when I hear the thing about Canada, like everyone in the States will say, if you're an NBA person, well, basketball in Canada really started with Vince Carter and the Raptors. And I'm like, shut up. Like that annoys me. If you really look at when Canadians started coming up, it's after Steve Nash broke through.
Yeah.
Steve Nash was the first one that was so good, picked 13th overall by Dallas, right?
Yeah.
After Steve Nash, then you start seeing more and more Canadians, because it's not about Canadians being good enough or not. Canadians were good enough before.
Yeah.
When Steve Nash broke through, he proved it for Canadians that Canadians can be just as good, if not just as good, but all-stars and MVPs. That tells Canadian players that mental visualization to see that path forward, number one. So for me, I wanted to do that for myself, but like I said, I was that first guy coming out and nobody even knew how to help me. Like national team coaches, you were on your own on an island. So I came out of that island going, and so for me, when I grew up, playing on the national team was everything. I mean, I wanted to play in the NBA. I wanted to play in the NBA. I needed to play for Canada. I still, to this day, I am a deeply proud, passionate Canadian.
Yeah.
Playing for the national team and representing my country was the greatest joy and honor of my life as an athlete. Like there's nothing like it. And, and it's so, for me, I was just having such a blast all the time and so proud all the time to be Canadian, to represent Canada, to wear the flag, and then to get out there and show the world what Canada could do. And I had my moments too, where like I said, it was the greatest privilege ever. And I live to this day with a ton of gratitude. And I am the biggest fanboy for Team Canada all day long. And if I can use the next 20 years of my retirement years to bring value and help them raise money and help the team advance and support the players that are playing in the league or the players that are not playing in the league, to talk or just be around people that are only there because they love our country and they love Canada basketball, then that's what I'm about. And that's what I'm hoping the next 10, 15 years of my life is about. It was the greatest joy and privilege of my life to represent my country, and I was honored to do it.
Yeah, awesome stuff, man. And I know you're spearheading the alumni association as well, and um, with Howard and others, and I think Misty Thomas on the women's
Misty
side.
Thomas, yeah.
So that's important. That's important stuff, man. And some of the diehards like myself and others love to hit the website and see just who's played for the program over the years. I want to ask you about playing for Jack Donahue, man. A legend in his own right, and
Yep.
influence a lot of guys. Just talk about Coach, man.
Yeah, and Coach D, it's really funny. Like Coach D, when I said I was coming up on my own, big wide-eyed, no clue about as a player, you got to realize for the men's basketball program pre-1976, like there's no program. Like you're talking, Coach Donahue comes in and starts building a program literally from scratch. And it's one thing, and he came from Holy Cross College, I believe, and New York guy, New York roots, New York basketball, had good success in college, was respected as a college coach. But even then, like it was forging a path forward, literally, like from scratch.
Right.
And so I have a lot of respect for what Coach D did, and I think his place in here. By the way, same with Coach Konchowski, by the way, who was there every step of the way, right?
Yeah.
Doc Ryan was in that crew as well by the time I got there. Doc Ryan was a player first, but he was coaching with them when I got there in the 80s. But it really was about forging a path towards the podium from nowhere. And so there was a lot of bushwhacking, very difficult, some stressful, underfunded, under budget perpetually.
Yeah.
And so really working against a lot of tough conditions. And I give a lot of props and a lot of respect to those coaching staffs. Because late, through the 80s, Coach D retired, of course, after the 88 games. And then we went from there. And that was a whole other situation following him. But certainly a historic, great coach with an enormous influence, and a lot of players like me, and I put them all together. Coach D, Coach K, Doc, I put them all together as guys that no matter what, you spend 4 years with someone on the national team and go to an Olympics together, that's going to change your life forever. So, I'm forever grateful for that. And like I said, remember, I was back there in '84 too, and I was starting to be in the national team then as a full-time player, and I had them for 8 years. Right. I mean, I played with just that crew for 8 years, and they were enormously influential on me, and I'm grateful to them. And they are certainly historic figures for Canada and should be.
Yeah, well said. Like you played with a ton of greats, and we've mentioned a lot of them. But like, who did you really become close with? Obviously, Eli was a guy you looked up to, and eventually played with him on the national team. But who do you got a friendship with now, maybe even to this day, that you didn't really know that well until you started playing together?
Well, so here's the weird thing about me, though, right? Like when I made the national team, I was like 17.
Right.
The next oldest guy was 26.
Yeah.
So like for Eli, Jay, Leo, Will, Mahar, John Hatch, I was this pesky high school pain in the ass that was just trying to play one-on-one. Like I literally every day. Tony Sims, by the way, who was great. And I love Tony. And so I had, for me, it was weird. It was like when I made the team, everybody on the next closest guy in my own age was at least 6 or 7 years older than me. Okay. So I was kind of this weird, isolated, pimply teenager that was like the awkward guy that didn't know what to say to anybody. It was weird for me because, Eli and Jay are and from the guard position as a guard, like there's Eli and Jay, and then there was everybody else from everyone else's perspective. But I will tell you this, and so I'm gonna dovetail this into what you always like to talk about. Who are my top 5? Because this will really help. Okay.
We can go to that right away too.
We can, but I can tell you right now, and it'll help me answer your question as well. So the guys that I have friendships now with that I just like, I hang out with Greg Wilcher a lot. Howard, cool. I didn't even really play. I played with Howard really for 1 year in passing. He was retiring when I was coming up, right?
Okay.
So Howard Kelsey, obviously, Misty Thomas. Because we had times over the years where the national team and the men and women would be training in Ottawa together, and I had those friendships with with Misty and Carol and a couple other girls that I was just good friends with because we were all kind of hometown Northerners outside of, that were would always cling together. But I think probably in terms of friendships long term that I've had that are persisting to today is, Carl Tillman for sure, brother, love him like no other. Greg Wilcher, brother, love him like no other. I still talk to Dwight Walton all the time. I still talk to Wayne. We came up together. Like I said, me, Dwight, and Wayne came up together as they're Montreal, I'm Sudbury. We're closer probably to the French culture than anyone else. And we kind of came up and vibed together as the young cats fighting against, the very well embedded 1984, 88 teams like that. There was a crew of 7 or 8 guys that were not going anywhere. Like no one was going to be good enough to knock those guys out. Right. So we kind of broke through, and that was a big deal in 84 and 88. And I think, there's guys I love, like obviously like guys I look up to still that are iconic people for me. Leo Rautins. Leo Rautins, I want to give him a particular shout out. Leo was the one guy when we were playing together and we were touring in the late 80s, early 90s. Leo tried to get me contracts overseas. He was always trying to help me. He was one guy more than anyone that actually said, "You're a pro and you should be playing overseas. Let me try and make some calls." Like he would actually help me as a player. So he was way more than a mentor, way more than, wow, one of the great iconic players in the history of Canada. He actively tried to help me and did help me. He still doesn't know, but he actually did get me one contract where he introduced me to a team, and then they called months later and I wound up going to play for a while. And so he was great. And so those friendships are there. Like Danny Mahar, like if I hang out with Danny Mahar for 5 minutes, I'm laughing and I can't stop. Bill Winnington, like literally all those guys. But to me, it was different. Like every one of them was like my big older brother.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like think about you when you're 18 or 25 and here's your 17-year-old kid brother that's like, "Hey guys, can I play? Can I play? Want to play one-on-one? Want to play one-on-one?" Like that's the way I felt like. I felt like that guy that was just kind of tapping them on the shoulder and bothering them and annoying them all the time. And I literally would go like, "You play me one-on-one? No. Tony, will you play me? No." And the one guy that played me the most that would never say no, he would never avoid the challenge was Carl Tillman. So but anyway, so it's different for me because my age was so much less than those guys. And then the irony came in when Steve and Nash and I were playing. Like he didn't even call me by my name. He just called me Gramps. Because by then I'm in my 30s. When he's making the team, I'm 30 or getting over 30. "Hey Gramps." Hey, and I was like, okay, well, I guess so. The tables turned and it was the same. And Steve was that much younger than me, right? I think I'm 8 years older than him. So and he, of course, like I said, is the greatest of them all. So I could start with Steve to tell you this point blank, that still to this day, Steve Nash I think he is the best ever Canadian. He's our GOAT.
Right.
But I also think he's the most important for that reason, because that is the great media lie that I hate, that basketball in Canada started to thrive because of the Raptors and Vince Carter. The Raptors and Vince Carter were great for Toronto, and that's true. But the first truly great Canadian, because here's the thing, Vince Carter didn't create a vision for young Canadian athletes throughout the entire nation to say, "I'm a homegrown Canadian and I can make the NBA too. And I can do great in the NBA." You have to be able to visualize yourself in the shoes of that player who broke through for an entire nation. And that's why Steve Nash is the reason. And again, I always challenge people, go back and look at all of the players who started getting drafted in the lottery. Steve Nash is first. The first guy, of course, that did it in a meaningful way was Leo Rautins, and then Billy Winnington, right? If you want to go to our highest draft picks, right? But the reality is the guy that broke the dam, that started the flow of Canadians to start going, "Hey, wait a minute, this Nash guy's not so bad, and he's great. Well, we should go get more guys like that Nash guy." Because Steve not only made Canadian kids believe they could do it, he made American coaches, Division I coaches, pro scouts go, maybe these Canadians can compete. So it happened on both sides. And that's the one thing that Steve will always have forever that no one else will have. Even Shea would never have that, right? Steve was the first that truly broke through from the guard position, but also I think made it possible and real for Americans and Canadians to visualize Canadians as outcomes and successful NBA players. So that's why Steve is my number one, okay? Then right after that, you got to have Shea now, because Shea Shea might wind up being, I don't know that he'll get 2 MVPs like Steve. He should win it the MVP this year.
Yeah,
And but if Shea is an MVP and wins a championship, right, which is something that Steve did not do, then Shea has the opportunity to eclipse as our greatest player of all time. But I put Steve and Shea 1 and 2 like that in that order, only because Steve has the historical importance.
Yeah.
The guy right after Shea is Leo Rautins, because Leo Rautins was his own lottery pick. But Leo Rautins was like, what people don't realize, I played with Leo when he was in his mid-30s. He was at the end of his career, and he already had knee surgeries on both knees, and he was half the athlete he was when he was a pro. But even then, Leo was magic to play with. Like, and literally they called him Magic, right? And they called him White Magic. And like he would go out there and like the way he could pass, and Leo's vision and Leo's basketball IQ is probably to this day still like Leo and Steve and Shea, they're equals in terms of basketball IQ and vision and being able to just, I'm standing right here and the ball goes there, right? And it's just magic. So that, but the next guy on my list though is a guy that everyone forgets about, and it is Carl Tillman. Carl Tillman, and I'm telling you right now, Carl Tillman is the greatest Canadian shooter in the history. I think percentage-wise, I'll tell you right now, you put me at the peak of my shooting ability, I'll put me in a gym against anybody that was ever there. I probably, in my last 3 or 4 years, the national team, I was shooting over 50% from 3. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Like 51, 52, 53. And I was our best shooter for about 5 years. And then until I retired. Right. But that was because Carl had retired. Steve hadn't showed up yet. Right.
Right.
So, but I was one of the best in the world. And I'm very proud of that, by the way, as you can tell. I'm happy to allow myself to tell you how great I was. Right.
Yeah, you should be.
Thankfully, I played before internet, and you can't fact check me, so I can say whatever I want, right?
Right.
Manny, I don't believe I missed a shot in 1991.
Yeah.
But the truth is, here's the thing with Carl, though. To this day, Carl still has the Olympic record. He set it in 1984. He hit 10 threes for Canada. Carl, and this is why Carl is very properly a Hall of Fame. He is easily a Hall of Famer. It is a travesty that he's not in the Hall of Fame, because unlike Jay, unlike Eli, unlike Leo, all great players, nobody, like I came up as a young person, I respected and loved Eli, respected and loved Jay. I wasn't afraid of either one of them. Neither one of them there was never been and then Eli took the game over and scored 40. Never happened. Never happened with Jay really that way either. But Carl was the one player. We all knew, by the way, if Carl Tillman got going, you stopped everything. You just give him the ball. Feed Tillman. And that's why he has the record. He didn't do it just once or twice. Carl Tillman and I had back-to-back games where there were must-win qualifiers. We had to play Argentina with me, and then he played Uruguay the next day. We had to win the Argentina game. That was my game where I went off, and that one we won that one in Argentina. And then we had to play. Carl went off and probably had 8 or 9 threes in that game too. Wow. But he was such a great shooter. Nobody in the history of Canada has ever heated up and went off shooting the way Carl did. He was feared as a player. So as a Calgary guy, you should appreciate that. The greatest Calgary dinosaur basketball player in the history of the world, right?
Right.
And but Carl, I think, was feared as an offensive weapon. Like if Carl got going, he was unstoppable. His release was so fast. He could hit from, like he was shooting Steph Curry jumpers, Steph Curry distances, no dribble, just on the run, standing still. He was unparalleled. To me, in terms of Olympic performance, he's still the greatest shooter in Canadian history in terms of Olympic performance. And his record still stands today. 40 years later, he and Carmelo Anthony still share the record. Okay. Right. So perspective, Steph Curry, that was so off the charts, wasn't as good as Carl's shooting performance in 84. And then the last 2 guys, I think probably Billy Winnington gets the nod, but it's real close for Greg Wiltshire and Bill Winnington, because when I look at who's the greatest Canadian player, I don't care what you did in the NBA.
Right.
I'm looking at contribution to the national team. And in that way, Wiltshire played longer. So Greg Wiltshire, to me, would, even though it's like, yes, Billy had the NBA career and Wiltshire didn't, I give the nod to Wiltshire because no one contributed more as a big man for Canada than Greg Wiltshire than anyone. And Greg Wiltshire is properly in the Hall of Fame. He should be there. But that's why I give them the nod. I don't look at them and say this guy's better than that guy. I look at it and say they're both different players, but Greg Wilter just had more years and more games and did more for Canada than any other big man probably ever did for Canada. So there's my top 5.5.
No, I love it, and I love asking that question, Dave. And when I do, it's always, and I think the guest knows it too. It's more about contribution to the national team. It's not so much pro results or pro careers. So it's everyone's five is different, man, and yours is laced with a lot of history. And I think I was stuck on four like for the longest time, and then I was like, I in the last couple of years, just with the things Shea has done, I'm putting Shea in my five now too. So
yeah, I would challenge you though. Like here's the one thing though I got to tell you. There's a lot of guys that had great moments. The best for the 1984 team, their best performance obviously was the '83 gold medal in Edmonton, right? That was a historic. But to me, that's a big deal. But it was the student games, right? It wasn't the World Championships and it wasn't the Olympics, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But if you go back and look at every big game that mattered, every qualifier, every must-win game, no one in the history of Canada outperforms Carl Tillman. No one.
Nice.
Ever. And that's one of those things. If you've got someone that's a stat hound that can go back, look at the big games in '83, look at the big games in '84 in LA. So, and again, let's let the stats speak for themselves, right?
Yeah.
There's no other Canadian in the FIBA record books like for an Olympic performance like Carl Tillman. So that's why that's one of those things where Carl doesn't benefit from being in the right city in terms of media.
Right.
And Carl did other things. Carl went to the Denver Nuggets and decided not to play for the Nuggets. He went on a Mormon mission instead. In his personal spiritual choices, which I have great respect for, he didn't value playing for money that way. So he could have. That guy could have played in the league for a long time, but he made a different choice, and I respect that. So he's a guy that should be in everyone's top five. And so that's why I lobby more for him, because he's a guy that probably rarely gets into the top five discussion. Absolutely should be. And the reason I would say I'm the one that would know, I played against every single one of them except Shea.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Steve, Leo, Jay, Eli, Billy, all those guys that are in everyone's top five except for Shea. Yeah. I played Stu Granger, Tony Sims, all those guys back in the day. I played with and against all those guys. And I can tell you, up close and personal, Carl was the only guy I was like, man, I cannot let him get going or else it's over.
Right.
I'll never be able to put that genie back in the bottle if Carl Tillman gets going.
You're in the books, because I think that's the first time you've been put in a five on the podcast. So very cool. We appreciate that, and it's always unique, right? Everyone's got a different take. So
there's a saying. I had a law degree, right? And there's a saying that everyone always remembers the facts in the light most favorable to themselves, right?
Yeah.
And so for me in my story, I will tell you that, I of course I remember my own career in a way that, because I know in my own experience, my own narrative is always going to be different, right? My journey, if I was from Toronto and I did everything I did and I was in a Toronto high school perspective, my career would be different. My perspective would be different, right? But that's why the national team is so important. That's why shows like yours, by the way, are important, because my perspective is different from Howard's from BC. By the way, another guy, probably one of the best athletes in the history of Canada you've never heard of, Dan Becker, that played at Colorado with me out of Alberta, and Joey Vickery, guys that played in Manitoba. Like people don't know these names, but these guys could play. JD Jackson could play, and so I know tons of guys that there's a great history in Canada. Like I said, I could give you the top 10 players you've never heard of that I would put on the court with just about anybody.
Right.
Anybody. And we'll do that podcast some other time.
There you go. Man, any shout outs or thank yous before I get you out of here? And again, man, appreciate this. It's been a lot of fun, and I've loved the stories, man.
I got to, first of all, thank you for having me, talk with you. I could talk Canada basketball all day, but I want to do a couple of big things. And I do. I owe such an enormous debt of personal gratitude to Canada and the national team programmatically, right? The national, to this day, to this day, people ask me about the dream team and playing against Michael Jordan, or, I've had people bring me their video games, by the way, where you playing me against Michael Jordan and the Nintendo one, and I autograph video games and stuff. Like, playing for the national team and representing Canada has been, I think, for everyone that plays for the team, it changes your life. It changes your life forever. I'm talking to you now, 35 years after the last time I played a game that meant anything, about that stuff. And it's so that. But I think shout out and thank yous to the 84, 88 teams that I was and all those players from that era of teams. And one guy that I should mention, by the way, the guy that started my national team, and I am remiss for not saying, Ken Shields.
Right.
Ken Shields and Ken Olenek. Ken Olenek and Ken Shields were my junior national team coach. Ken Shields pulled this ratty hockey player out of Sudbury and threw me into a junior national team tryout when nobody even knew who the hell I was. Okay. Right. And then and everything exploded from there for me. So Ken Olenek is a guy that I've known forever. And I've talked with him, by the way, even in the last 2 weeks. His son, Kelly, of course, is playing here for Utah, where I live. But Ken Shields, and in particular, I've discovered me as, I'm not much of a discovery, but Ken got mine. If it wasn't for Ken Shields, I don't have a national team career, period. Okay. He got me started. He got me to my first tryout. So I've got to give Ken Shields that shout out. And I have so much gratitude for him. He was a great coach of mine in the 90s too, for the 92 team. Yeah. And he'll always be a dear friend and a mentor. And I just have enormous respect for him and gratitude towards Ken Shields and everybody else I've spoken about up to now. But I just never want to forget Ken Shields and how important he was to me and how huge he was in my career.
Yeah, well said, man. Well, great names mentioned throughout the episode and conversations and stories, man. And yeah, awesome. We truly appreciate it.
Hey, anytime. Happy to do it.
You bet. That's a wrap on another episode of Canada Hoops. I want to thank David Turcotte for pulling up. Thank you for listening. Remember to rate and review us wherever you get your podcast. Check out our YouTube channel. Hit us up on Instagram and x.com. Keep supporting Canada basketball and our Canadian Hoopers, and we will see you on the next episode.